Virtually every Jack the Ripper tour visits Goulston Street, and for good reason. Well, for two good reasons: the graffiti and the apron. What happened here in the early hours of the morning of the 30th of September 1888 occupies an important part in the history and mythology of the case. And uniquely, it's the only location that can definitely be connected to the Jack the Ripper case that is still largely intact. All the crime scenes have been altered beyond recognition by the passage of time. In this episode of the House of Lechmere, I'm going to tell you the story of what happened here and its significance, and give you my interpretation of how and why. Before I go on, as a form of shorthand, I'm using the term Jack the Ripper to describe the serial killer. Just before the events which I'm going to discuss took place, a letter had been received by the Central News Agency from someone calling himself Jack the Ripper and claiming responsibility for the murders which had taken place in Whitechapel over the preceding weeks, which had already shocked the world by their brutality. I've already made a film on these letters, which I'll provide a link for below. The 30th of September was the night of the so-called double event. At about 1 a.m, Liz Stride had been found murdered with her throat cut in Duckfield's Yard off Burner Street in St George's in the East. At about 1:45 a.m, the badly mutilated body of Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square in the City of London. It's very close to where the Gherkin is, that tower, that strange shaped tower called the Gherkin that you can see there. At Catherine Eddowes' inquest, it was determined that from Burner Street to Mitre Street is 3/4 of a mile. A man could walk the distance in 12 minutes. At about 2:20 a.m, 35 minutes after Catherine Eddowes' body had been discovered, PC Alfred Long patrolled down Goulston Street. It was on his beat. He was normally based in Whitehall, but had been temporarily transferred to Whitechapel as part of the police reinforcements that had taken place in the light of the murders, so he was new to the area. Like many policemen, Long had been in the army, serving in the 9th Lancers. One thing to bear in mind about Long, which may or may not have a bearing on what happened, is that he was thrown out of the police in July 1889 for drunkenness. Anyway, as he patrolled down Goulston Street, he was unaware that either murder had taken place, which is quite revealing in a way. No message had got out to the surrounding beats. On this turn, Long saw nothing to attract his attention. At the same time, roughly, that Long passed down Goulston Street, so did Detective Constable Daniel House of the City Police. House did know about the murder of Catherine Eddowes. He'd come from Mitre Square and was rushing around looking for anyone suspicious. House and Long both said they were in Goulston Street at 2:20, but they didn't see each other, which tells us something about trying to synchronise police timings, which some do in the Bucks Road case. They were probably both a few minutes out, which is why they didn't see each other. Just before 3 a.m, PC Alfred Long returned to Goulston Street. This time, as he walked down, he noticed something in the entrance to numbers 108 and 119 Wentworth Model Dwellings, which is just over there. It was a piece of blood-stained cloth, still wet on one corner. There was also some fecal matter on it. Above it, on the black brick door jamb, was written a message in white chalk. He wrote this graffiti down in his notebook. It read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Long searched the 6 or 7 other staircases. We can see one there, one there, one there, one there. There's 4 there, and there's 3, I believe, on this side. These staircases which went into the buildings went down as well as up, but he found nothing. He didn't knock on any doors and saw no signs of blood. Up to this stage, he was still unaware that either murder had taken place, but a policeman from a neighbouring beat came on the scene. That was PC 190H, and Long found out about the Mitre Square murder and decided to take the piece of cloth to Commercial Street Police Station, which is up in this direction, and he left PC 198H to guard the front entrance of the stairwell. After patrolling the area, Detective Constable House had returned to Mitre Square and then went to see Catherine Eddowes' body at the City Mortuary in Golden Lane. Catherine Eddowes' apron was still attached to her via the apron strings, and it was noticed that a portion of the apron was missing. It was soon realised that the missing portion of Catherine Eddowes' apron must be the piece of cloth that PC Long had found. It was sent first to Lemon Street Police Station, the headquarters of H Division of Metropolitan Police, and from there the police surgeon, Dr. Baxter Phillips, took it to the mortuary at Golden Lane. It was an exact match. There was even a sewn-up repair that crossed over between the two parts, so clearly, after murdering Catherine Eddowes, Jack the Ripper had passed Goulston Street and dropped part of her apron in that door just over there by the chairs. I say clearly, but there's more to it than that. One ripperologist, Trevor Marriott, has suggested that the apron piece may have been taken here by a rat, or that Catherine Eddowes may have left it here herself earlier, as it might have been a sort of discarded sanitary towel. We can get lost in these sorts of theories. I'm going to presume that the killer left it there sometime after he'd murdered Catherine Eddowes. This apron piece is the only item of tangible physical evidence that was ever found by the police during the entire Jack the Ripper series. It was produced in evidence at Catherine Eddowes' inquest on the 11th of October 1888, but has since been lost. It was presumably held for some time by the City London Police, but at some point stolen or thrown away. When House heard about the discovery at Goulston Street, he returned there and also copied the graffiti into his notebook, but with slightly different wording. The Jews are not the men that would be blamed for nothing. So now we have two different versions. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing, and the Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing. Two spellings of Jews, and the word not was in a different position. In his inquest testimony, Long also provided the spelling of Jews as Jews, Jews, and Jews as Juews. So we have Jews, 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 and Jews. The graffiti immediately caused consternation. Sir Charles Warren, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, was informed, and he came down personally to Goulston Street, which was in the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police, even though the murder it related to took place in the City of London. The boundary was just a couple of hundred yards away. Warren consulted with Superintendent Thomas Arnold, who was in charge of H Division. PC Long returned to Goulston Street from Commercial Street Police Station at about 5 a.m, and at about 5:30 a.m. he witnessed the graffiti being washed off that wall by a sponge on Warren's instructions before it could be photographed. It was feared that it would lead to anti-Jewish rioting. With daylight and more people passing by to go to Petticoat Lane Market, we can see some of it here today. It was right on Goulston Street. The area was getting quite busy, and Warren feared that the graffiti would be seen. A city police photographer had been waiting for enough daylight to take a picture. The objections of other city police officers present, such as House, were also overruled. As we have seen, this led to confusion over the exact wording. House suggested just erasing the first line mentioning Jews, or whatever variant of that word, and even that was refused. By the way, a little later, city officers did conduct door-to-door inquiries of these flats, but no useful information was obtained. One arguable point is, did wiping off the graffiti cost Warren his job? He resigned from his position as Commissioner on the 8th of November 1888, by coincidence, the day before Mary Jane Kelly was murdered. It's sometimes claimed that this was purely because Warren had written an article in Murray's magazine. It was a monthly magazine, and he wrote an article in their November issue that came out at the very beginning of November. And as a public servant, he had not been authorised to do this. Henry Matthews, the Home Secretary, remonstrated with Warren over this, and he resigned, and Warren resigned as a result. However, the background was that as the scandal over the erasure of the Goulston Street graffiti grew, Warren had been obliged to explain himself personally to the Home Secretary, and then on the 6th of November, Warren had written to the Home Office saying, by way of explanation, it was just getting light. The public would be in the streets in a few minutes in a neighbourhood very much crowded on Sunday mornings by Jewish vendors and Christian purchasers from all parts of London. There were several police around the spot when I arrived, both metropolitan and city. The writing was on the jamb of the open archway or doorway, visible in the street, and could not be covered up without danger of the covering being torn off at once. A discussion took place whether the writing could be left covered up or otherwise, or whether any portion of it could be left for an hour until it could be photographed. But after taking into consideration the excited state of the population in London in general at the time, the strong feeling which had been excited against the Jews, and the fact that in a short time there would be a large concourse of people in the streets, and having before me the report that if it were left there, the house was likely to be wrecked, in which from my own observation I entirely concurred, I considered it desirable to obliterate the writing at once. Was Warren justified in believing that widespread rioting would have resulted had the graffiti been seen and with a danger of loss of life? He was supposedly acting on the advice of Superintendent Arnold, who surely should have been in a position to know. Yet the content of the graffiti, the message, was soon plastered over newspapers all over the country. The earliest report I've found was printed on the 8th of October. It said, within a few feet of this spot, he had written upon the wall, "The Jews shall not be blamed for nothing." Most unfortunately, one of the police officers gave orders for this writing to be immediately sponged out, probably with a view to stifling the morbid curiosity which it would certainly have aroused. But in so doing, a very important link was destroyed, for had the writing been photographed, a certain clue would have been in the hands of the authorities. It was also mentioned multiple times at the inquest, so the intent of keeping the message secret to avoid riotous disorder was thwarted, and there were no riots. There was nothing approaching a riot, so Arnold and Warren's anxiety was totally misplaced. Their behaviour in washing the graffiti off the wall was found to be totally unjustified by events. Robert Anderson, who was head of the Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard, was scathing about his superior's actions. In 2 cases of that terrible series, there were distinct clues destroyed, wiped out absolutely, clues that might easily have secured for us proof of the identity of the assassin. In another case, there was writing in chalk on the wall, a most valuable clue. Handwriting that might have been at once recognised as belonging to a certain individual. But before we could secure a copy or get it protected, it had been entirely obliterated. Due to Warren's actions, we don't know what the writing looked like, nor the exact wording. To illustrate Warren's imbecility, the wording he recorded differs from that noted by Long and House. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. There is also, the Jews are not the men to be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The Jews are not the men to be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. An internal Home Office memo perfectly illustrates the confusion over the wording. The word on the wall was Jews, not Jews. Not so, I believe. This is important, unless it's a mere clerical error. This illustrates the utter folly of Warren in deciding that the graffiti should be erased before it could be photographed. Surely a police cordon could have kept people away. In the light of this criticism, Warren wrote a self-congratulatory and at the same time defensive piece in the November 1888 edition of the Murray magazine, as I said before, saying what a wonderful job he was doing, and that forced his resignation. There's loads more content to come on this fascinating subject on the leading Jack the Ripper YouTube channel, so keep watching this episode to the very end, and don't forget to subscribe, share, like and comment. Now I've given you the bare bones of the story around Goulston Street, I'm going to go into some of the details. As is often the case with the Jack the Ripper mystery, and this is why the case is so compelling, there are more questions than answers. There are mysteries within mysteries in this case. When was the apron dropped? This is a mystery. PC Long claimed that it hadn't been there when he passed at 2:20. If this was true, then obviously the culprit must have dropped it between 2:20 and about 2:55 when it was discovered. But the murder took place before 1:45, just over there, just 5 minutes or so walk away. So where had the culprit gone in that time? He must have had at least 30 minutes to spare. Or was PC Long mistaken? How big was this apron piece? No one knows. Aprons tend to be quite large, but not always. So reasonably, it must have been a fairly large piece of material. Was the graffiti a Masonic message? This is based on a false claim popularised by Stephen Knight in his book Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, as part of the royal or Masonic conspiracy explanation for the Jack the Ripper murders, that the Jewes, or Jews, were three murderers in Masonic tradition: Jubilar, Jubilo and Jubilum. But as I say, these murderers were not called Jewes. That's an invention. Warren was a Freemason, and his foolish decision to wash the graffiti from the wall has fed the Masonic conspiracy. This, by the way, is the black brickwork. It's not the same door, it's just around the corner, but that's the kind of black brickwork that the graffiti would have been written on. What does the graffiti message mean? I'm going to assume that Jewes means Jews. This was the only sensible assumption at the time. Various different creative explanations have been proposed with totally different words based on how the writing might have appeared, but I'm going to count them all as nonsense. It's commonly pointed out that in its various forms, the message contained a double negative, not a nothing. Taken literally, this means that the Jews shouldn't be blamed. In what might be called Cockney parlance, a double negative is a common idiom where the double negatives don't cancel each other out, they reinforce the negative. So to a Londoner's ear, the message means that the Jews definitely should be blamed for something. But what should they be blamed for? Is the message random anti-Semitic graffiti that just happened to be written above the spot where the apron was left? What was it blaming the Jews for? The murders, or for some perceived injustice? Could it be a confession from a Jewish perpetrator blaming himself for the murders? Or was it deflection, with the culprit blaming the Jews for the fact that he'd murdered twice in one night? Psychopathic serial killers often try to deflect blame away from themselves. With the murder of Liz Stride over in this direction, it's usually presumed that the culprit was disturbed in Duckfield's yard by Louis Dimschutz, who was connected to the International Working Men's Educational Club, which was next door, an establishment that was largely patronised by Jews. So the culprit may have blamed those Jews for his need to sate his unfulfilled desires by killing again, this time in Mitre Square. Did Jack the Ripper write the graffiti? PC Long said he couldn't tell how long the graffiti had been there. House thought it looked like it had been written recently, saying it looked fresh, and if it had been done long before, it would have been rubbed out by the people passing. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson, who doesn't seem to have seen it in person, described the writing as blurred and in an ordinary hand, which supposedly bore no resemblance to the handwriting in the Jack the Ripper letters that had just been received by the police. Wentworth model dwellings, which we can see here, is these blocks here and down Goulston Street there. It's all Wentworth model dwellings. Were relatively newly built. They'd only been completed in 1887. Nearly all the inhabitants were Jewish. It seems unlikely to me that anti-Jewish graffiti would last long in nice new buildings that were largely inhabited by Jews. Graffiti in this era tended to be written in chalk, and contrary to some modern opinion, it was relatively rare, certainly compared to today. So I think the graffiti must have been quite fresh, which points to it having been written by the culprit. Where on the wall was it written? The best description comes from Detective Constable House. There were 3 lines of writing in a good schoolboy's round hand. The size of the capital letters would be about 3/4 of an inch, and the other letters were in proportion. The writing was on the black bricks, which formed a kind of dado, the bricks above being white. We also have Warren's description from his report to the Home Office. The writing was on the jamb in the open archway or doorway visible in the street. Which way did the culprit go after visiting the site? This touches upon another controversy. Was there a back way out of Wentworth model dwellings? The doorway into numbers 108 to 119 now leads into Happy Days Fish and Chip restaurant. In 1888, the ground floor was residential, and in front of the building was an open or void area like this. This is part of Wentworth model dwellings on the other side of Goulston Street. There was a void, a sub-basement area like this in front of Wentworth model dwellings, and there was a fence along here. It was open, it wasn't a grill like this, and there was a fence along it to stop people falling in. The void was to give light to the basement flat. We can see a bricked up window to the basement flat here. There's the top of it, and you can see the sill down there. That was the basement flat window. The ground floor flats would have been accessed via a doorway like this, and because we can see where this window is, so the floor level was probably here. The ground floor level of the ground floor flat would have been about here. So there would have been you get into the flat here, into a door here, and there'd have been a couple of steps up into the ground floor flat and stairs down to the basement flat. You can see the door down here full of litter and various mess. There's actually an original doorway there. When the ground floors were converted to commercial use, as they are where Happy Days is, and they are on this building here as well, the floor of the ground floor was lowered, so the ground floor, so you get straight in from street level. So the ground floor was lowered from about here down to there, which correspondingly made the basement flat, the ceiling lower, and they were no longer could be lived in because the ceiling was too low. They tend to be used for storage now. At the rear of numbers 108 to 119, there's another door. It would have been a bit like this before that one had been bricked up. It shows no sign that there's anything other than original, and it's directly in line with the front door. It was commented on at the inquest that when PC Long left for Commercial Street Police Station, he left that constable guarding the front entrance, which carries the implication that there was also a back entrance. No one could have got out of the front part of the building without being seen by the constable left on the spot by the witness. So it's virtually certain that there was a front and a back entrance, and the culprit could have entered via the front entrance, dropped the apron piece, written his message, and exited unseen out the back. Alternatively, he could have gone in and out via that front entrance. So what's my explanation for all of this? I've often said that in many ways I'm a Ripper traditionalist. Also, whether or not you think the graffiti was written by the Ripper really boils down to your own gut instinct, your own predisposition. Some think the Ripper wouldn't have tarried to write a message. My gut instinct is that the killer left Mitre Square, dropped the apron and wrote the graffiti. I think he was a natural risk taker and relished making statements, who revelled in his notoriety. This channel is obviously called the House of Lechmere, so if I think the graffiti was written by the killer as he left the apron piece in the stairwell, then I must think that Lechmere did this. If we look at the trigonometry of the events that night, then it points to Lechmere. The double event murders were the only ones in the Whitechapel murder file that took place prior to a normal day off for a working man. The murder of Liz Stride occurred much earlier than was the case for the other murders, around 1 AM, and very close to where Lechmere's mother lived on Mary Ann Street with one of his daughters, Mary Jane. That name's a bit of a coincidence, alongside her current husband Joseph Fordsdyke, with whom she had entered into a bigamous marriage some years before. Up until the June of that year, Lechmere had also lived very close by on James Street. It's not exactly a stretch to suggest that Lechmere might have spent his night off in the environs of Berners Street, that he came across Liz Stride and murdered her in the yard adjacent to the International Working Men's Education Club. As he had been brought up in that area, he would have been well aware that this was in effect a Jewish drinking club. This was a district that experienced the first waves of Jewish migration from Russia, with the pre-existing social fabric undergoing considerable change, which led to the growth of anti-Semitism, as noted by Sir Charles Warren. I would suggest that Lechmere was disturbed by Louis Dimschutz before he could complete his mutilation ritual, and feeling thwarted, he made his way west to where he knew he had the best chance of finding another victim quickly. Prior to June, his route to work in Pickford's at Broad Street would have taken him through Berners Street and onto the area around St Botolph's Church in the Aldgate area, which had a reputation for being a place where unfortunates gathered to ply their trade. Catherine Eddowes had just been released from Bishopsgate Police Station in this direction after she'd earlier been arrested for drunkenness down here in Aldgate in this same vicinity. Lechmere found Catherine Eddowes and she took him to Mitre Square to meet her horrible fate. Amongst the mutilations, the examining doctor, Frederick Gordon Brown, noted the uterus was cut away with the exception of a small portion, and the left kidney was also cut out. I would suggest he took these body parts and wrapped them in part of the apron that he cut away from her body for that purpose. He left Mitre Square, but before he headed home to Doveton Street in this direction, he needed to stash those trophies. There were no less than 3 Pickford's depots nearby. The place he was known to work at Broad Street, another at Hayden Street, and another at White Swan Yard. As an employee of 20 years standing, he would have been a familiar and trusted face. If PC Long was correct and the apron was not there, just up there, at 2:20 AM, then I would suggest that Lechmere used one of these Pickford's depots as a bolt hole, leaving the body parts in a secluded cubby hole. Or who knows, perhaps he fed them to a guard dog. Except for the half a kidney that was sent to Lusk, of course. See my film on that? I'll put a link to that in the comments below as well. He then resumed his journey home via Goulston Street after PC Long had passed by on his earlier round. He left the bloody apron piece as a marker to highlight the message he quickly wrote on the wall as a taunt, as an expression of his general angst against Jews and to deflect blame onto the Jews for his own behaviour in murdering 2 people that night. It was the Jews that made him do it. Then he went through Wentworth model dwellings to emerge on the other side and made his way back home on what I've dubbed Jack the Ripper's Superhighway, down Wentworth Street, Old Montague Street to Bucks Row and back down to Doveton Street. I've done a film on that as well, and there'll be a link on that below. Incidentally, at the inquest into the murder of Catherine Eddowes, the following question and answer passed between the coroner for the City of London, Mr. S.F. Langham, and Dr. Golden Brown. Would you expect to find much blood on the person inflicting these wounds? No, I should not. So, the culprit could have gotten clean away without any obvious blood staining on his person. Think about it. Catherine Eddowes had suffered by far the most horrific mutilations on any of the victims up until that moment, and yet, in the doctor's opinion, the culprit need not have had much blood on him. Think back to the murder of Mary Ann or Polly Nichols on the morning of the 31st of August 1888, when she had suffered a fraction of the wounds that were to be inflicted upon Catherine Eddowes. That puts into perspective claims that whoever killed Polly Nichols must have had obvious blood traces about his person afterwards. Anyway, that in summary is what I think happened, and it explains everything that happened that night. What do you think of that solution? Anyway, thank you for watching. As always, please subscribe, it's free, and share and like, and of course comment below. What do you think of all this?